My crystal ball predictions for the upcoming college football season. You don't want to miss them. Next on this week's episode of Michigan Podcast.
But there's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deep for Anthony Clark. Waits for it. Hit. Caught.
Hey, they said you can't be Ohio State. Now what?
Brady gets terrific. Throws it, and a touchdown, Knight again. Schultz just before Brazil got him, and a leaping interception by Woodson.
Harbaugh back to throw over the middle. Caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet. Touchdown, Michigan. On its way. It's good.
He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris packs a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Sacked. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
Win it. We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again. Michigan.
Go Blue, I'm Steve Deace, and welcome to one of our most fun episodes every year right here on Michigan Podcast. We begin to roll out and unveil my annual college football preview. You know, I started doing this on the way to basketball camp. I was challenged by a buddy of mine. I was reading Lindy's college football preview. I was 15 years old, and a buddy of mine in high school challenged me and said, I was complaining about their predictions. You can do such a good job. Do it yourself. And so I did. I did my own college football preview that year, and I predicted West Virginia to get to the national championship game against Florida State. West Virginia did get to the national championship game that year against Notre Dame. And after that, I thought, well, this is so simple. I'll just do this every single year. And I've been doing it ever since, and it's not quite that simple. But the favorite thing that I do in my college football preview every year, and you can read the whole thing for free. All right, whole thing for free. We're going to get to a lot more than you're going to see on this week's episode of Michigan Podcast and Bigger 10. We'll have some more of the preview as well. The full preview, you can read it for free right now on our Patreon page at patreon.com/Michigan Podcast, patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. My favorite thing that I do every year, my crystal ball predictions of the top 25 things I think will or won't happen the upcoming college football season. And last year, man, go back and watch our reconciliation episode from January. Last year is one of the strongest crystal balls I've ever had. We had a really strong performance, which means you want to follow or maybe even fade. Looks like we might be looking at some regression in the mean coming up this year. So let's roll these out. Top 25 things that I think will or won't happen this season. Number one, for the first time ever, 3 teams from the same conference will make the college football playoff. Now, this is going to happen a lot in the future when we go to 12 teams, but this is new this year. And number 2 ties right into that. That also means for the first time ever, 2 teams that didn't even win their own divisions will make the college football playoff. So a lot of people thought I was nuts last year when I predicted both Michigan and Ohio State would both make the college football playoff, and they did. I think that's going to happen again, and I think Penn State's going to join them. 3 teams from the same conference. Number 3, 2-time defending national champion Georgia will be the only undefeated team at the end of the regular season. That schedule Georgia is playing is a complete joke. Number 4, however, Georgia will not become the first team since Minnesota from 1934 to 1936 to win 3 consecutive national titles. Number 5, Texas and Oklahoma will finish their tenures in the Big 12 by playing each other in the conference championship game, which I'm sure will make Brett Yormark, the new commissioner of the Big 12, extremely happy. Number 6, Ryan Day will leave Ohio State after the season to take over for the retiring Andy Reid as head coach of the Kansas City Chiefs, and he will be replaced, given the lateness of the coaching search when that occurs, he will be replaced by offensive coordinator and Buckeye favorite Brian Hartline. They'll stay in-house. Number 7, SMU will win its first conference title since it was in the defunct Southwest Conference in 1984. That's right, it's been 40 years since SMU won a conference title. Number 8, Ohio will win its first conference title since 1968 back in the MACK. That was the same year. Al Kaline, Bill Freehan, Norm Cash, Denny McClain won the World Series for the Detroit Tigers in 1968, also the last time the Ohio University Bobcats won a conference championship. Number 9, after losing 4 games in a season only once between 1996 and 2001, Nebraska will lose at least 4 games. This just blows my mind. For the 20th consecutive season. If you grew up a kid of the 90s of the Tommy Frazier Huskers, this just blows your mind. 20 years in a row, Nebraska will lose at least 4 games in a season. But all is not lost. Matt Rule will take the Huskers to their first bowl game in 7 years in his debut season. 10. If you grew up in the 80s like I did, this blows your mind too, but here we go. Miami will lose at least 4 games for the 16th time in the last 18 seasons, but will bounce back to make a bowl game after a losing season in 2022. Number 11, Auburn will lose at least 4 games for the 16th time in 18 years. By the way, those other 2 years, they won and played for the national championship. That's crazy. But they're going to lose at least 4 games for the 16th time in 18 years. But Hugh Freeze will take the Tigers to a bowl game in his debut season. 12. Kirk Ferentz will retire as Iowa football coach after the season and be replaced by the exact opposite profile. Offensive-minded, but also Midwestern-based, Kansas coach Lance Leipold. 13. Deion Sanders will at least triple Colorado's win total from last season. That means he's got to win at least 3, because last year they only won 1. 14. For the first time, Alabama will fail to be invited to the college football playoff in consecutive seasons. Has not happened. It will this year, I believe. Number 15, Mack Brown will retire as North Carolina football coach after the season and be replaced by Clemson offensive coordinator Garrett Riley. They go young, they go offense. 16, West Virginia will fire Coach Neil Brown and replace him with UTSA coach Jeff Traylor. They finally figure out we're in the Big 12 and got to recruit some Texas kids. 17, for the first time ever, Wisconsin will fail to make the Big Ten championship game for a 4th consecutive season. 18, the Heisman Trophy finalists will be in alphabetical order. Marvin Harrison Jr., Ohio State. J.J. McCarthy at Michigan, Michael Penix at Washington, and Caleb Williams at USC, the reigning Heisman Trophy winner. But I am predicting, number 19, that Marvin Harrison Jr. of Ohio State will become just the 6th wide receiver to ever win the Heisman Trophy and the 8th Buckeye to win the coveted award. Number 20, these I think will be the results of the top 5 September non-conference games. I think that we will see LSU beat Florida State. I think Brian Kelly gets his revenge for last year's heartbreaking loss in the opener to the Noles. Alabama over Texas, but I got to tell you, there are several personnel groups where I think Texas is the better team, but I just can't pick Steve Sarkisian to beat Nick Saban on the road until I see it. I'm going to go Ohio State over Notre Dame. I don't care how high the grass is there in South Bend. The best unit on the field, and by a sizable margin, will be the Buckeye receiving corps. Texas Tech will upset Oregon. Serve notice early. The Red Raiders will be a surprise team this year with the home upset. And I think Texas A&M beats Miami. Bobby Petrino serves notice that he still knows how to coordinate an SEC offense, provided Jimbo Fisher will truly let him do that. Number 21, Boise State, North Carolina, and TCU will start the season in the AP Top 25, but none of them will finish there. 22, Miami of Florida, SMU, and Texas Tech won't start the season in the AP Top 25, but will finish there. 23. The following first-year coaches will lead their teams to bowl games this season. Jeff BROHM at Louisville. Seen that schedule? They could do even better than that. Jamey Chadwell at Liberty. Luke Fickell at Wisconsin. Hugh Freeze at Auburn. Tom Herman at Florida Atlantic. I think he will kill it there. And Matt Rule at Nebraska. Liquidate, number 24, says these teams that will win at least 2 fewer games than they did last season. In alphabetical order, I think BYU, Central Florida, Cincinnati, East Carolina, Fresno State, Houston, Marshall, Purdue, South Carolina, TCU, Tennessee, and UAB all lose at least 2, all win, I should say, at least 2 fewer games than they did last year. However, we close it out with this. Invest in these teams that will win at least 2 more games than they did last season. Again, in alphabetical order, Akron, Auburn, Buffalo, Central Michigan, Colorado, Colorado State, Iowa State, Louisiana Tech, Miami of Florida, Nebraska, Northern Illinois, Oklahoma, Texas A&M, and UTEP. I think all those teams will win at least 2 more games than they did last season. So those are my crystal ball picks for 2023. Let's come back and get a second opinion on those picks and more from Mark Rogers, the voice of college football, next. And now time for a second opinion. Mark Rogers is here, the voice of college football, self-proclaimed, but he does have a killer YouTube channel nevertheless. So maybe he lives up to that most days. If you like to cover the sport 360 degrees, stem to stern, he does a great job. They've got correspondents, reporters from all across the landscape of college football year-round. I know a lot of people are thinking of win totals this time of year. Great place to get some information by following Mark's channel. Good to have you back here with us, Mark. And let's get your take. I just ran down my annual crystal ball top 25 predictions of what I think will and will not happen this upcoming college football season. And if you recall, going back to January, Mark, we brought you on for our reconciliation. My crystal ball last year was one of the most accurate I have ever had. All right, so I've got a lot to live up to here. Overall, how do you think I did?
Well, I always marvel at the ingenuity, I will say. I just enjoy, there are the Miami Auburn predictions, which I think are, they're more interesting to me and more intriguing because of just the projection of a streak or a trend that is a bit peculiar or, just fascinating to me. So I don't think you're going out on a limb in certain spots. Those two come to mind, the Nebraska, Miami, and Auburn streaks. But others, you certainly take your shots. And you take your shots knowing that the odds are strictly against you.
So let's get your take. Let's do this 3 ways, and then I'll let you take the conversation where you want it to go. All right? So one that you were like, I'm with you. Another one that you were like, no chance in hell. And another one that you were like, that is so insane. What were you thinking? And maybe I should consider it. All right? So let's start with one that you're definitely tracking with me on.
Well, I will say in extension of what I just stated that I just posted a video the other day basically filling in the blank. Is this the year blank? Is this the year this continues? Is this the year this streak stops or ends? Or, for Ohio State, Michigan, of course, we had a streak going 2 years ago that was stopped in regards to consecutive wins by Ohio State. And then in 2022, it was, is this the year Michigan wins in Columbus for the first time since 2000? So now we're looking at a possible Michigan win streak of 3 for the first time since 1998 or 1999, 97, 98, 99, and even before that. So I just, as a college football nerd, as a sports nerd of facts, trends, stats, it's just a fascinating run of things. So you continue to sit on this narrative of running my guy Ryan Day out of town. I see that. And so you stay with that. But if Brian Hartline receives this job, now I would have thought this same scenario not only just predicting that Ryan Day is going to lose his job in some manner, either he's fired or he leaves to go to the NFL, and then to predict his successor, and now it's Brian Hartline, I believe, replacing Luke Fickell. I believe that's the call there.
Right. That was Luke Fickell was last year. Yeah.
Yeah. If that in fact happens, Brian Hartline has one guy to thank that he would receive that job, and that's Ryan Day.
Yeah, I don't have Ryan Day losing his job. I have Ryan Day taking a promotion to go back to the NFL and coach the best player on planet Earth with a chance to win a Super Bowl.
Well, Hartline can thank Ryan Day for obvious reasons, obviously, that he's moving on, but also that he performed in a way that gives Ohio State the confidence that an inexperienced head coach can take over for a successful head coach and keep the train rolling.
Now,
So
one of the reasons that I would pick Hartline as the successor is the timing of when. Hey, I'm a Michigan fan. I know a lot about the timing of the NFL coaching carousel, Mark. A lot. More than I've ever cared to know, as a matter of fact. All right? The timing of when the NFL makes those decisions, especially if it's the Chiefs, it wouldn't be until well into February. You figure the Chiefs are going to be at least in the playoffs. They're playing till at least, even if they're out in the first round, that's at least mid-January. If they were to win a couple games, you're talking the end of January, early February. They win the Super Bowl again, you're talking, mid-February when he would step aside, Andy Reid in my scenario. And so that would lend itself. This is similar to what happened. It was even later when Bob Stoops stepped aside, remember? He collected that longevity bonus on June 1. Do you remember this? He collected a longevity bonus on June 1 and then retired a couple weeks after that. And Lincoln Riley got the job, okay? And so it's about the timing. It's hard to bring do a national search post both signing days, for example.
So your series of coaching successions I find interesting. Of course, the odds, again, are stacked against you, so we don't hold you to any kind of high winning percentage.
I nailed
there.
Hugh Freeze to Auburn last year, though. Remember that? I nailed that one last July. Yeah.
That's right, you did. Kirk Ferentz moving on. Okay, this is a bit curious to me because on one hand, I raised the same scenario, not with Lance Leipold, but just with Kirk Ferentz several times here in the last, even before the end of last season, because some things are working against him and maybe some things moving in college football that he doesn't enjoy. NIL, the transfer portal, and now with USC and UCLA moving in and no Big Ten Western Division, he sees this as, let's go win it and then get out of Dodge and look good. However, he's being paid through 2029, or that's the contract, and that's a lot of money for him to walk away. So that will be a curious call one way or the other, because I can see the same scenario adding up to Kirk taking a favorable schedule as well this year and possibly winning the Big Ten Western Division.
I could see that too. Which is it's a great
there.
ending note. Do you really believe Kirk Ferentz will be the Iowa football coach in 2029, Mark?
No.
Neither do I. Yeah. And the reason I went with Lance Leipold, as I said earlier, to me, you always hire the opposite, right? So you bring in a new AD, wants to put his own mark on the program, you go back to the offensive Hayden Fry, wide open offense era, and here's a guy that has done that with Midwestern ties. He's a little bit older, so he would fit in a little bit, with kind of the culture at Iowa as well. But I could also see a younger offensive mind, too, trying to completely rebrand themselves as updated for the 21st century. I think one of the fascinating things, and Andy Staples is talking about this in another context with the Northwestern job coming open, is yes, I understand that there is a power two. And there will be, starting next year, 32 schools in that Power 2, 16 in each conference. I get that. And I get that they have more revenue than other places. But let's play a game, just you and I, right now. Would you rather coach Washington or Northwestern?
Washington.
Would you rather coach Utah or Northwestern?
Utah.
Would you rather coach NC State or Northwestern?
NC State.
I could do all the same things with Vanderbilt, right? I mean, Okay, so you're going to make, I guess, more money. That's assuming, for example, that Northwestern wants to pay it, and we don't know that. But you could make more money coaching at Northwestern than some of those places, maybe. But you're grist for the mill. I mean, Northwestern as a program is 14 out of 14 right now. Starting next July 1, they'll be 16th out of 16. No divisions at all. I think the odds of a year where one of these teams is never in the Big Ten championship game. Like, I'm going to turn 50 later this month. For the rest of my life, natural life, I'm going to call it right now, there will not be a season when Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, USC, UCLA, USC, or UCLA, Nebraska, those 6 teams, there will not be a single season the rest of my natural life when one of those teams will not be in the Big Ten championship game. Won't happen.
I was waiting to see when that list would end because I was about to challenge you. But yeah, that list of 6, yeah, I'm not going to challenge that list of 6 in any such way.
And then you can get in other programs. I didn't throw Wisconsin in there. I mean, they've had more success than Nebraska in the last 20 years, but not historically. So let's throw Nebraska in there, 7. Let's throw Michigan State in there. All right? So they had a very successful era under Mark D'Antonio. Those 8 teams. Do you believe the rest of your natural life there will ever be a Big Ten championship game where one of those 8 teams is not in the game?
No.
Neither do I. In fact, I don't even think it's even like close.
I don't think it's close either.
Well, then the margin for an Iowa, which is actually a really good program, but especially for a Northwestern, the margin for what? You're playing 9 games too, so getting to 6-6 ain't easy. Okay, and I think the one thing you and I don't know, and a lot of people don't know, is what will bowl games outside of the really big ones really mean with an expanded playoff, right? Like, they don't mean much now, but there's still the alumni trip and everything else. But will they mean anything? Will they be like NIT basketball berths? You know what I'm saying? Like, get 4 or 5 years into a 12-team playoff now, where 12 teams getting in, so we have 300% more teams getting in, Mark, which means we also have 300% more teams competing to get in, right? So it's not just 12 teams getting in, but then there's a whole another layer of percentage of teams who are now legitimately in the playoff conversation to the very end that are not in it right now. And so that's going to change everybody's expectations and everything else. The idea of, hey, I went to the Duke's Mayo Bowl. Charlotte's a nice place, nice bowl game. Maybe you sell 10,000 alumni tickets if you're Northwestern or Purdue or Illinois to that game in this current era. You think 10,000 alumni are paying to go to the Duke's Mayo Bowl 5 or 10 years from now? Because I don't. And I think that's something that has yet to be quantified about what does success how do you even define success moving forward in a more playoff-driven sport than ever before?
Well, you define it by the playoff for those schools like Ohio State and Michigan and others. That Ohio State's most important game. Like I asked the question a few weeks ago, if you could change the game, a result for your school last season and then throughout history, but for last season, what result do you change for Ohio State? Well, at any other time, you change the Michigan game. That was more important to me than anything. National championship games included. But the way this thing is headed and even just the feel of the season, of course, you would have changed the Georgia game and not the Michigan game. And now we're looking at seasons in which we have rematches and possible series of 3 in one season. Not only Ohio State, Michigan would be the most obvious of those 2 schools that would match up 2 and 3 times a season, but this could be Clemson, Florida State, it could be Georgia, Alabama, and others. And when you go down that list again, you could have stopped much sooner. And I'm right on there with you as somebody like you that looks at the current state of affairs, looks at the current status of those programs, looks at history, knows how to project. But at the same time, if you would have asked me, for example, in the mid-1990s, will the Tampa Bay Devil Rays ever reach a World Series? I would say, are you kidding me? How in the world are they going to get past the Boston Red Sox and the New York Yankees? That's never going to happen. There's too much money being spent in all those other markets. So that happens. And I, by the way, Steve, expect to live a long and happy life. So it may be a little bit longer than you think.
Yeah, but notice the way I framed the question. The Yankees and Red Sox have largely been good that entire era at the same time. Okay, so I didn't frame it that Northwestern could never have a 95 season and win one. I didn't phrase it that Iowa could never have a 2002 season and win one. What I said was, can you ever envision a season where there will ever be a Big Ten championship game where one of those 8 schools is not in the game? No. And so that means the margin for error and success for the other 8 teams in this league is shrinking considerably in the new environment that starts next year. All right, let's go to the prediction you thought that was, what the hell, man? No way.
Well, I don't necessarily know that there's that. There's a number of ones that I would bet against, absolutely.
Okay. All right, give me those.
Again,
yeah.
The Day-HARTLINE succession is reasonable, just like the Day-FICKELL succession, but as a betting man, the odds of it happening are minuscule. Therefore, I would bet against it. But the previous portion of this conversation leads us into the top of your list with the 3 playoff teams coming out of one conference, or maybe one division. One division. So we know that the odds are stacked against you again, but I believe we know where we're headed with that prediction, because then later in the prediction list you state that Georgia will make the playoff or finish the regular season undefeated. So even if they lose the conference championship game, they're going to the playoff, but they're not winning a national championship. So this is, of course, good news for the Big Ten, that the Big Ten is finally going to beat the SEC. And you're betting against Georgia, even though they have an easy entry to the playoffs based on this fluff non-conference schedule and a weak SEC schedule as SEC schedules go. So, and you also understand that the College Football Playoff Committee is going to do everything they possibly can to avoid 3 teams from the same conference or division reaching the playoff.
Well, we'll unveil this tomorrow on Bigger 10, but my prediction for the final college football playoff rankings are number 1, Georgia, number 2, Ohio State, number 3, Michigan, number 4, Penn State, number 5, USC. So I technically have 4 Big Ten teams. On the cusp of in or being in the playoff. And I went back and forth with the 4th and 5th spot between Penn State and USC the entire time. And ultimately, I just think Penn State would have 1 loss at Ohio State, but beats Michigan. That is a better loss and a better win than USC would have with 2 losses, even though USC would be a conference champion. And that's... But could I see the nod go to the conference champion as well? I could, I mean, I have the Big Ten East Division Championship coming down to the 5th tiebreaker, which is record of non-divisional or win percentage of non-divisional opponents. And so by virtue of playing Wisconsin, Iowa or Ohio State has the stronger non-divisional record, and that would give them the nod over Penn State in Michigan. I mean, that'd be nuts. But if you look at power ratings, man, you look at my own. I have Penn State. I think I told you this a couple weeks ago. I have Penn State about a field goal to a touchdown beneath Michigan and Ohio State. I've got Michigan slightly ahead of Ohio State, but they're virtually tied. And then I've got Ohio State somewhere between a field goal and a touchdown on a neutral field behind them. The problem is I have Penn State favored by double digits over everybody else on their schedule. Anywhere,
Stephen,
home or away.
That you're a bit caught up in, and I agree with you, and my predictions are like within an arm's reach away from me. And believe me, I'm right there with you, making comparisons across the country, and it sounds like a scenario that's somewhat close to yours. I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that you're the least confident of Penn State, and if they had the type road trip that Ohio State's taking to Wisconsin or in Iowa instead of hosting Iowa, that you would, that might trigger you.
They kind of do. They're at Maryland the week before they play Michigan. But man, if you know the history of that series, Mark, they just freaking own that team. I mean, they have owned that program for 100 years. And a lot of times they're not even close, okay?
Streaks end.
Say that again?
Streaks do end.
They do end. And they do end. You remember a few years ago, there was a game where Arkansas, when Brett Bielema was coaching Arkansas, And they went for it on 4th and 29, I believe, against Ole Miss and got it and won that game. Do you remember that? Okay.
Yes, Hunter Henry threw the ball over his head.
And that ended up actually
that knocked my Buckeyes out of the playoff.
Yeah, that basically decided the national championship. All right, because Ole Miss did not make it to the playoff, and Alabama got in without even winning their own division. Remember? Okay, it was 2017. So yeah, so sometimes these crazy games, that kind of stuff happens, and I could see Maryland Penn State at the end of the year. If my scenario is right or wrong, Maryland Penn State was the reason why Maryland pulled the upset over Penn State, or they didn't. So great stuff. Any final words before we let you go?
Well, I just want to say happy birthday a little bit early. That's great to hear.
Thank you.
And that's pretty much it. But yes, I love the list. I love the concept. You're taking some chances there, but then you also craft some other ones that I think are close to guarantees, but I enjoy the crafting of the narrative. Auburn, Miami, Nebraska, those slots as well.
Good stuff, my friend. We'll see you again in a couple of weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
You bet. This week's Twitter poll results, we asked you, is it national championship game or bust for Michigan football this season? And 79% said yes. 21% said no. Regardless of how you voted on this, isn't it just damn cool to even ask this question legitimately and even ponder it? Think about where we were, where we thought we were, and the arguments and discussions we were having amongst ourselves after 2020. If I'd have told you that we'd be posting questions like this in 2023, you'd have told me I was nuts. And yet here we are. So praise Jimmy Harbaugh for that. Feedback of the week. Andy wrote, as a Michigan fan, I hate this ongoing count. We ducked Ohio State in 2020. Sean Duffy, who's a Buckeye, says, Steve, I would argue if you played in 2020, you would not have had the past 2 years you had at Michigan football. That retreat was a turning point. I agree. I love the fact that we ducked Ohio State in 2020 with a depleted squad, then came back and crushed them again the next 2 years. He who knows when to run away lives to fight another day. Right? I mean, you don't just sit there on the beaches of Dunkirk and let the Nazis finish you off. Get the hell out of there if you can. Live to fight another day. There's a great tradition, a grand tradition throughout human history of strategic retreats. And strategically retreating, or ducking, if you want to call it that, which I'm fine with. One man's ducking is another man's strategic retreating. Depends on which side you're on. But strategically retreating from that 2020 Ohio State game absolutely set the stage for where we are. I mean, Michigan might have gotten out there and gotten 60, 70 pointed, given the status of the roster. And at that point, it's really hard to bring Harbaugh back. And you're probably going to ask Ward Manuel to make a coaching change. And I'm probably like many of you, not the most confident in that possibility. So, yeah, I disagree. I don't disagree with Sean, the Buckeye fan, at all. I think avoiding that game and just moving on and starting all over again, I think absolutely set the stage for the awesomeness that has been the last 2 years. All right, that's going to do it for this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. Don't forget to like, rate, subscribe, follow, 5-star review, whichever applies, however you watch, like on YouTube, or listen, like on iTunes or elsewhere. Help us to find even more Michigan fans just like you. Please, we would appreciate that. And also don't forget that you can follow us on Twitter in between episodes at Michigan Podcast there. Until the next time, I am Steve Deace. Go Blue.